Hi, Vintage Guitar people. Welcome to Have Guitar Will Travel, presented by Vintage Guitar Magazine, with your host, me, James Patrick Regan, otherwise known as Jimmy from the Deadlies. Today I'm speaking with guitarist and photographer Greg Vorobiev, otherwise known as Greg V. He's had the opportunity to play with songwriter Bonnie Hayes, American Idol judge Randy Jackson, Ronnie Montrose, keyboardist Corey Lirios from Pablo Cruz, Hendrix drummer Buddy Miles, Double Trouble post Stevie Ray, and a host of others. In our conversation, we cover a locally famous guitar battle we both played in. Growing up as an Army brat, playing in bands in rural Florida, his first guitars and his early influences. Greg brings up that he's looking for his first real guitar, a black Gibson Les Paul Custom, serial number 491498, a factory second with the number 2 stamped on the back of the headstock, bought from Zavarella's Music in Arlington, Virginia, that was stolen in 1983 in Novato, California. It was purchased by his parents, who have both recently passed away, and holds a great deal of sentimental value to Greg. There are pictures on Greg's Instagram page. We talk about moving from Florida to San Francisco, and having Huey Lewis guitarist Chris Hayes suggest him to Bonnie Hayes, his sister, for the guitarist role in her band, which led to Greg working with American Idol judge Randy Jackson. Greg describes working with Pablo Cruz keyboardist Corey Lirios, scoring TV shows like Max Headroom, Baywatch, and other soundtracks. Then Greg tells us about working and touring with Ronnie Montrose and befriending Alan Holdsworth. Greg tells us about working with Hendrix drummer Buddy Miles and the adventures that ensued. Then Greg describes how that gig led to working with Chris Layton and Tommy Shannon of Double Trouble post Stevie Ray Vaughan. Then Greg describes moving to Nashville and recording his solo record, Tailgate Troubadour, and how that led to a friendship with Nashville session ace Tom Bukovac. Greg describes working with David Halliday, son of European superstar Johnny Halliday. Greg was one of the first people on YouTube doing demo videos of new gear, and he describes how that transitioned him into a career in photography. You can find out more about Greg at his website, gregvorobiev.com. That's GregVorobiov.com. He's also got a strong Instagram presence at the handle Greg Vorobiev. Please like, comment, and most of all, share this podcast. I'd really appreciate it. And please support Vintage Guitar Magazine and all the wonderful things they do for us guitar players, because they do so many wonderful things for us guitar players. Here's Greg.
Mr. James Patrick Regan.
How are you, Greg?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, man. Look at you. Like, you must be from a military family, like right on time, you know?
No, I'm not. You are.
I am, actually. Yeah. That's why I take notice of these things.
Oh, okay.
How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing real good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Very good. Where are you based right now?
I'm in Burbank, California, which is, just part of LA. Everything's just a blur in LA. It's a big city that sadly doesn't have much of in my opinion, doesn't have much of a city center or a heart of it, unlike the Bay Area where I used to live, San Francisco. San Francisco feels like a city, and it's big enough to feel like a city in terms of culture and art and food. But it's small enough to escape. LA is very kind of hard to escape.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. San Francisco is where I met you the very first time that we met. And you don't even know that we met.
I don't know that. No, not. When was that?
We met at the Guitar Grudge Match, that very first one.
Were you in the show, in the Grudge Match show?
I was. I was a big, tall dude with like really blonde hair, or white hair almost.
Wow. So, okay. I mean, that was what? Was that 83 or 84-ish? Something like that? Early 80s?
The first one was 82.
82? Okay. Because, I ran into, I think, a mutual friend of ours, Brian Kehoe.
Oh, of course. Kehoe. Right? Yes. He was in 83. Right, he's class of 83, and where you won.
Wow. Okay. Exactly. And so he was reminding me when I was up visiting Dunlop, we had lunch, and where, he works over at Jim Dunlop. And
sure.
He was reminding me that he was in the show, and he was telling me all these things that I had forgotten about the show. Remembered a guy climbing a pole during the contest, and that was him.
That was him, exactly.
But I didn't know that at the time. I didn't connect the names and stuff,
Yeah.
So you were in it too. How crazy is that? That
Yeah.
was a weird thing, right?
Oh, it was.
Fun.
It was super fun, but I was completely overwhelmed. And I believe you were like the voice of reason. I don't know how old you are. I think you're maybe a year older than I am. And at the time, that was huge.
Yeah, oh, yeah, probably. I mean, I'm in '82, so let's see. I was born in '63.
Oh, we're the same age.
So I'm like 19.
Yeah, I think
guess
we're both 19.
Oh my God, I didn't even know. Like 19. Yeah, that was a funny, really cool event, and I just remember feeling like I was Opie from Mayberry amongst all these other guys who had these like pink star-shaped guitars, and some I think had Floyd's maybe even around then. I'm not sure.
Floyd was brand new.
And I'm playing a Telecaster. Yeah, and I'm playing a Telecaster
exactly.
like I just got off the turnip truck or something. You know what I mean? And I just felt out of my element, but maybe I don't know. It was just a very unique experience, and I thought I was a rock and roll guy until I got on stage with the real rock and roll guys back then.
Not even. Not even.
The hard rock guys, I should say.
In '82, another guy that competed was Ryan Roxy, and his name wasn't Roxy at the time, but he now plays with Alice Cooper.
Oh, I didn't know. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So quite the alumni, huh?
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, I mean, there's Kehoe, right? And then I'm trying to. Well, MK, of course, was a legend.
Yes,
exactly. In Chumby, and I was playing with the singer of Chumby.
Oh, really?
I think after that, Baldy Ray was his name.
Sure, yep.
We actually had a rehearsal studio up in Novato, and I lived in that rehearsal studio. It was like a bat cave. There was no windows, but it was that was after I think Chumby obviously had broken up.
Sure.
But MK was just sort of, oh man, you got to hear MK, and he was just such a brilliant player
and a showman.
And exactly, he would throw the guitar all over the stage.
And
right?
he had a flash pot in the neck pickup in his Strat.
I didn't know that. Wow, kind of like the Ace Frehley sort of thing.
He had it rigged somehow, so he'd throw it in. I'm sure everybody's very, 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 very entranced with our conversation. But he would throw it in the air. He had some sort of string hooked up to his belt, and when the string pulled, it would blow up the flash pot as it went up in the air. Something that would be completely illegal now.
Oh my God! Yeah,
and he would do it at the Stone or the Keystone or wherever they happened to be playing. He had some smoke pot hooked up to the back of the guitar, so it would start to smoke out of the back of the guitar or something like that.
Oh, I vaguely remember hearing that, and it's like these are on the fringes of my earliest like California ventures. These memories now, but I have such fondness for that. For that era of music and living in the Bay Area. I miss it so much. I would love to be back and living in San Francisco if I could. Man. So you've been there the whole time then. So you haven't left.
Yeah. I went to Berkeley School of Music in Boston for a short while, and I lived in Atlanta for a little while. But yeah, I've been basically in the Bay Area for the whole time.
Oh, well, lucky you.
Maybe. I don't quite have the success of some of the people I played with back in the old days.
I mean, that's just all relative stuff, though. I mean, it's woulda, shoulda, couldas, and I never have tried to look back. I mean, I'm older now, and when I meet younger players and so forth, and I just think of all the great opportunities that we had with clubs and record labels and people buying music and listening to music, and versus younger players, it's a different world. I'm not saying it's worse, but in some aspects, it's a much harder way to try to make a living as a player now.
Sure.
Oh yeah. And so I feel like maybe sort of my generation was one of the last few to sort of get the great benefits of when, I used to play with Bonnie Hayes in the Wild Combo. I played with her for a little bit, not a very short run, about a half a year or so. And there would be, 1,200, 1,500 people coming to every gig. And I can't imagine people going to clubs now with that kind of turnout.
You know what? I've had the opportunity to interview a few people, and there actually is a club scene for some of the newer bands.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I'm wrong.
Well, you're not entirely wrong. For hard rock and stuff like that, not so much. But for some of the sort of pop bands, and it's all about click and
Sure.
and great songs too. But
Right.
there's a lot of click and there's a lot of pounding social media in just the right way and being the first to do certain stuff. But
Right.
it actually drives people to the clubs. And so if you go to a club, like the Independent up here, Slim's is closed now, but just a little while ago, Slim's, if you went to Slim's, you'd go to a show and a younger band, if they had good songs and they had a good social media presence, there'd be a lot of people there.
Wow. Okay. Well, that is great. I mean, again, yeah, you're right. With the opportunities now, the counter of what I'm saying is now bands have the chance to be able to be heard much quicker, sooner, reach a wider audience via the net and social media, right?
Yeah.
But translating that to touring and income and paying a mortgage and on a outside of a regional basis, just seems to be has gotten harder and harder, I guess, to a wider perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. You'd be better off playing, hotels, restaurants, bars, breweries and stuff like that, trying to make a living.
Right. Sure.
So we should back up a little bit, I guess. Where did you grow up?
All right. So, as I mentioned, I'm an Army brat. I was actually born in the Presidio in San Francisco, which is the old Army base. And so my dad was military, and I only lived there for about 6 months, and then he got stationed in Okinawa because he was sent over to go to Vietnam.
Okay.
And so I grew up in Okinawa for a handful of years. And then we moved to Washington, D.C., or outside of D.C., a town called Woodbridge, Virginia. Okay. Which back then, it was pretty much the sticks of D.C. I mean, it was a bedroom community, but it's not like what you expect these days. It was fairly amount of rural trees and creeks and, a lot of nature. And that's where I started playing guitar.
Oh, wow.
And when I was 13 and a half, and then my parents bought a farm in Florida, the Panhandle of Florida.
Oh, wow.
And when we moved there, I was expecting palm trees and, everybody on roller skates and skateboards, but it was pretty much the redneck Riviera when I moved down there. And it was great, in all honesty. It was in the late 70s. And the greatest aspect was I started playing in clubs when I was 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
And you weren't even supposed to be in clubs, but the South down there was so... The club owners didn't care if you were young as long as you got people drinking because they made money.
Of course.
And the cops never showed up unless somebody was getting stabbed, which happened in front of me one of these clubs. And it was crazy times. But the cops never really paid attention if you were underage. And so I was in clubs, earning my stripes at a really young age. That would have never happened up in Woodbridge, Virginia, because it was more straight. Everything was... It wasn't as loose up there. I mean, it was much tighter up in the up in the DC area.
Yeah. But you started playing guitar when you were in the DC area, or had you moved to Florida?
Yeah. I was 13 and a half, and I was just massively consumed with music as a listener. I was a huge Elton John fan. My older sister, Marie, she was almost 10 years older than me. She had the Beatles. She had all these great record collection that she had as a high schooler. And I would just go and steal her records and go listen to them. And it got to the point where, I didn't want to be a listener anymore. I wanted to be a participant. I wanted to be able to play an instrument.
Sure.
And I talked my mom into going to the PX, the local military place where you could go on base to buy cheap stuff. And I bought they bought me a $15 acoustic guitar.
Oh, wow.
And that started it all. Okay. 5 hours the first day. The next day was 4 hours because my fingers hurt from the playing 5 hours the day before.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that led me down the path like all of us, 6, 8, 10 hours a day, pretty much for the rest of my life until the last, I'd say, 10 years.
Wow.
I was just all consumed with music and the guitar.
Wow. Were you aware of any of the the famous guitar players from the DC area when you were that young? Like
yes, exactly. Danny Gatton was the big one.
Okay.
I hadn't seen him play because, like I said, I couldn't go into clubs. I was 13 and a half. But there was a magazine there called the Unicorn Times, which is kind of like maybe like Bam Magazine would have been in the Bay.
Yep.
And I remember them having a feature story on Danny Gatton with his Les Paul Varizer, that black Les Paul Custom.
Sure.
And the Magic Dingus box that he had to connect his Leslie and delay on and all that.
Wow.
So, yeah, certainly him. But as I mentioned, my sister's record collection, and then the Elton John records. And then I discovered, I don't even know where, Leonard Skinner, probably from the radio.
Okay.
Ted Nugent.
Yeah.
All the classic rock stuff of that era. And then like Jeff Beck. I'll tell you a funny story. I don't think I've ever told you this before, but I bought Wired, Jeff Beck's Wired album, because I saw a magazine ad in like, it might have been in like Rolling Stone or something like that back in the day. And it was like electrifying guitar player, Jeff Beck's new record, Wired, buy it now. So I go to the store. I had only been playing like a month or two, but I'm like, well, this guy looks cool. This album cover looks cool. He must be great. I need to buy this record. I get it home and I hated it. I kept waiting for the vocals. Where are the lyrics? There's no singing.
Where's Rod Stewart?
And I was like, well, yeah, there's nothing. I didn't even know Rod Stewart. I didn't know Jeff Beck's Legacy, Yardbirds, nothing. So I put the record down for like 6 months. And then I just went back to my Skynyrd and, Allman Brothers and classic rock and, Black Sabbath and what have you. And then 6 months later, I could play Freebird, like the solo, and I pulled out that Jeff Beck record. And my mind was blown. I was like, it was kind of like that line, when the student's ready, the teacher appears.
Oh, yeah.
And all of a sudden, Jeff Beck reappeared in front of me with Wired. And still today, it's one of my top 5 favorite guitar instrumental records ever.
Sure, of course. Of course.
Yeah. But I had no awareness prior to that. There was one kid in my neighborhood, a guy named Brian Black, who was a great guitar player, a few years older than me. And he showed me how to do pinch harmonics, like a la, Billy Gibbons kind of thing. And, you first try that when you first do it, and you're like, this is magic. This is sorcery. How are you doing that? And I couldn't figure it out. And then one day you just get your first chirp and you're like, oh, all of a sudden I'm playing Lagrange note for note kind of thing, and or trying to, so it's like things back then, if I didn't get them from records, I really didn't get them from anyone because there weren't a lot of people playing guitar besides Brian in my neighborhood, So records were my salvation. They were my freedom. I was dropping that needle on albums like we all did over and over 100,000 times.
Yeah, exactly. Until we ruined the records.
Yeah, and then when Van Halen came out, it was like, okay, this is the world has changed. For me, he was like the Hendrix of my era.
Oh yeah, of course.
In terms of rewriting rock and roll guitar.
Yep, exactly. Right before Van Halen, I don't know if you had the opportunity to see Rick Derringer, but he was like the last of the old school for me anyway. And then because I saw him with Led Zeppelin, he opened for Led Zeppelin at Day on the Green.
Wow!
And that would have been about the same time as we picked up a guitar, so around when we were 13.
What a great time to have experienced that. Oh my gosh.
And they were throwing their guitars across the stage. Him and Mark Cunningham was the rhythm guitar player at the time, or the second guitar player. Oh,
I was wondering if it was like Neil Giraldo or something.
No, that was a couple years later. And I guess Danny Johnson from Steppenwolf had played with Rick, and he had just left the tour to go to, I think, to play with Axis or some other band, some East Coast band. And then Rick Derringer got the Zeppelin gig for those 2 shows, I think. And this guy Mark Cunningham filled in, and man, it was over the top. But then, like you said, Van Halen just changed everything once he came around. Oh yeah,
I mean, and then I, became consumed with Van Halen, and the thing was, versus nowadays, when I say consumed, I wasn't trying to copy Eddie's tone. No. It was more like, what's he doing? What is that? How is he doing those harmonics? And Somebody Get Me the Doctor when he does the sweeping of his hand kind of across the palm,
Yep.
And things like that were like the techniques he was doing. I never really knew people trying to copy everybody's tone. And now things have morphed where a lot of people are not only getting, perfect replications or imitations, I should say, of people's technique, but they've really got the sounds dialed in them a lot of those great guitar players, They reverse engineered the signal chain.
Exactly. Well, and you can buy a Kemper and then somebody's already done it for you, and you just plug it in.
You're right. And you know what? I had a PV Mace because that was on the cover of One More from the Road, Leonard Skinner's live album, and
sure.
I had a PV half stack with the silver stripes, and you're not really going to get Van Halen out of a PV Mace, but I tried,
What was your first real guitar?
First real guitar. Okay. Well, that acoustic, was just whatever, firewood, basically, half-inch high action. And then the next guitar, I went to a place called Best Stores, which was sort of just a I don't know, like a Woolworths or something. And I bought a cheap electric guitar for like $30.
Sure.
And I played that for about 6 months after coinciding with the acoustic.
Uh-huh.
And then my first good guitar was a Gibson Les Paul Custom.
Okay.
That my parents bought me for my birthday in 1977. So I had it's kind of a bit of story. You want to hear this one?
Absolutely, I do.
Okay, I've only been telling it of recent because the guitar got stolen and I'm trying to get it back. I'm trying to find it again.
Okay.
So I was 13 and a half. Sorry, I was turning 14. I had a guitar teacher, a guy named Nick Canzona, great guitar teacher, for 6 months of my very beginning playing. I asked him, I said I wanted to go get a good guitar case for my crappy guitar. And he said, well, you got to go to Zavarella's Music in Arlington, Virginia, which is about 15 miles up the road from where we live. So my parents were kind enough to say, okay, let's go get you a good case for your $30 electric guitar from Japan, just a nondescript Taisco kind of thing.
Sure.
So we go in there, and my dad, being a military guy, he's like, well, son, step up, tell the man what you need. And I brought my guitar in with basically a thin vinyl gig bag, and put it on the counter. And I asked the guy, I said, hey, I'd like to buy a guitar case, a hard case for my guitar. And the guy's like, let me see your guitar. And I pulled it out, and he starts laughing at my guitar.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I was like a kid on Christmas morning where I didn't get my Red Ranger, Red Ryder BB gun. And I just slunk down like the Grinch dog with the antlers on his head,
Yeah.
And so he goes, kid, I could sell you a case, but it'll be worth more than this damn guitar, and I'm just crushed. And my parents are like, well, we drove all the way up here. Why don't you just go check out our guitars in the back room? And this store was really small. It was like the kind of place that they were hungry. If those guys hadn't eaten in that store and you walked in with a sack of potatoes and a chicken, you could have walked out with a guitar.
Wow.
It was a real wheel and deal kind of place. So one of the guy in the back room was like, hey, you see a guitar you want to check out? And I'm like, there's a black Les Paul Custom on the wall. And it was like Peter Frampton's guitar. And I said that because Frampton Comes Alive had come out. And I was devouring Frampton Comes Alive at that time.
Oh, of course.
And I was a huge, huge fan of Peter's. And so he's like, that's right. You got it off the wall. Plugged me in an amp, which I never had plugged in before because at that time I didn't own an amp. I was plugging in my dad's reel-to-reel tape recorder for my amp at home. And I had no reverb. It was dead dry. It sounded horrible. So this guy plugged me in an amp, and I heard all this reverb for the first time, and he had explained to me what that was, and I fell in love with it. 15 minutes later, I'm jamming on this guitar. My parents go, you ready to go? We gotta get back home. I'm like, okay. My dad kind of looks at me and goes, what do you think of that guitar you're playing? I said, are you kidding? This is like Peter Frampton's guitar. It's incredible, Dad. It's the most amazing. It's a Les Paul Custom. And he goes, well, get your new guitar and let's go home. And I looked up completely dumbfounded, and he's like, we just bought you the guitar for your birthday. Come on, we got to go. And I was like, I get tears in my eyes thinking about that moment. And all the way home, I was just so excited and never expecting that my parents would ever do anything like that. Because we didn't have a lot of money.
Sure.
That was a big deal for my parents to do that. But they saw that I was playing, like I said, literally 6, 8, 10 hours every day of 7 days a week. So they knew I was really bitten and consumed with music. And they were always good about supporting whatever me or my siblings were into. They were fully behind it.
Yeah.
And so that led to me getting my first great guitar.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And
can you describe it just so if people are listening and they
Oh yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, it's the serial number is 491-498. I remember it as if it's like I'm looking at a picture of my mother or something. I can see it. It's a factory second. Oh, wow. And back in the day, that meant that it had cosmetic Mars, but Gibson still sold it for cheaper.
Sure.
And it has a number 2 stamped in the wood in the back of the headstock, and the serial numbers below that stamped in the wood as well. Because sometimes in that era they would use ink stamps, but my serial number and the number 2 were actually impressed into the back of the headstock.
Yep.
So and it had a crack underneath the low E string, probably one of the multi tops that they used back in the 70s. The Norland era guitars had, they might add 3-piece, 4-piece tops or something like that.
Exactly.
And it was probably separating right underneath the low E string between the pickups. And so it had a crack already starting, but I didn't care. I mean, I love that guitar to death. And then it was stolen in 1983. after I'd moved to San Francisco.
So it's stolen in San Francisco?
It was stolen in Novato, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh, wow.
I've never seen it since. Huh. And now that both my parents have passed away, it's been on my mind. It's always been on my mind, that guitar. Uh-huh. And I've always, when I heard about Peter Frampton losing his 54 Custom in that plane crash,
sure,
it always would cross my mind. And then when Peter Frampton got his guitar back, I started thinking about my Custom, like, well, maybe I could get mine back, because I actually painted my pickguard white. I painted the bezels white. I painted the pickup selector white. I put gold knobs on my Peter Frampton. Yeah. He didn't have a pickup, and he had 3 pickups in his. Sorry.
Sure.
He didn't have a pickguard.
Yeah.
But I tried to make my guitar kind of look like that Frampton Comes Alive guitar. So I have kind of I'm trying to put the word out, to get the guitar back, and I'll pay the going rate for it. I'm not trying to, cause anybody havoc. I don't care really where it's at. I just want to get it back and pay a fair price for it.
Sure. And there's pictures of it on your Instagram?
Yeah, there's a few. I have a handful that are not super high res, but they're just, you can see me smiling in all the pictures, because I was just enamored, adored. And, that guitar it just has so many memories, not just of me as a child playing it, but of my parents getting me the guitar, and the history of me putting those tons of sweat into that guitar. Yeah. And then now, even the guitar being out of my hands, other people have spoken through that guitar, playing it, I'm sure. Uh-huh. And so it would be kind of interesting to hear what sort of dialect that guitar speaks now.
Oh, yeah.
After having all the different players come through it.
Exactly.
And have it come back home.
Yeah,
I would love that.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be awesome. We should talk about some of the people that you've worked with. So after the huge grudge match that turned our lives around, you mentioned you were playing in bands in Florida. What made you come out to San Francisco?
I came out the day after I graduated high school.
Wow. And why San Francisco?
Well, that's a good question. I had one friend who I knew from Washington, D.C. He was older. He was probably about 7 or 8 years older. We played in a band together, a guy named Rob Grace. He was a corporate guy at MCI, which was one of the early telecom companies, Uh-huh. I think it might have turned into Sprint or something. Oh, wow. But he was an executive there, and he had already moved out to the Bay Area. I knew I was going to leave home as soon as I graduated, because I wanted to drop out of high school. My parents wouldn't let me, though. Uh-huh. My mom insisted I got a diploma. She said, you have to have a diploma. If you want to go to college, we'll pay for it, but you don't have to go, but you need a diploma.
Sure.
So that's why I left the day after. As soon as I got the diploma, I came home Friday night from the graduation with 24 people. I went to a really small school.
Okay.
And the town was only 600 people. Gave my mom the diploma, went back outside, started packing up a 1972 Plymouth Fury 3, like a Bluesmobile car, Blues Brothers car.
Yeah,
and I moved to San Francisco the next day. It took me 4 days to drive across country.
Wow.
That was the start. And I just knew my whole life was going to be around music. And I knew I needed to go to a proper city, but any city. A town of 10,000 would have felt like Manhattan to me.
Sure.
After living in Laurel Hill, Florida, which is 10 miles from the Alabama border.
Okay.
Florida or Alabama border. So, yeah, I moved there. And, of course, my friend Rob, who I stayed with, he had pretty much abandoned music professionally and was just in the tech world and early tech world. And I was gung-ho about music. So I moved out, eventually got my own place, and just started hitting up music stores and any place I could go to try to meet people.
Sure.
And get heard. And the grudge match was one of those opportunities that Mike Varney, who put that on from Shrapnel Records, as you know, gave that opportunity. And through that, he put me in his, spotlight column that he had in Guitar Player magazine.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
And that started opening it up a few things. And really what I think the big thing that, it's not big in huge national terms, but for a local scene, the second year of that grudge match, like that first year, when you mentioned 1982, I came in third place with that article.
Yeah.
MK, who we spoke about, came in first. And second place was, I can't remember his name now, but I came in third.
Yeah.
And then Mike Varney, I guess it was so successful, he did a second round of the Guitar Grudge match.
Sure.
In 83, I guess.
Yep, that's right.
And And I was fortunate enough to win that. The real deal about that was real beneficial to me was the guest judge on the finals was a guy named Chris Hayes, who played with Huey Lewis and News.
Yep.
Exactly. And he was one of the guest judges, and he wanted to meet me after the finals. And somebody said, "Hey, Chris Hayes, the guest judge, would like to say hi." And I'm like, "Are you kidding? I would love to meet him." So we became fast friends. He was like, "You play like different. You play a little bluegrass, you play a little bit of this." And I didn't really play proper bluegrass. I just kind of fake stuff, you know?
Sure.
And so he really liked my playing. And just, I think literally a few weeks after that, his sister, Bonnie Hayes in the Wild Combo, who was sort of a local legend at that time, playing around the clubs there, she needed a guitar player because her boyfriend, guitar player Paul Davis, and her had a falling out.
Oh, okay.
So I got the gig.
Right on.
And then just as quickly as I got the gig, I started meeting like Randy Jackson. I met Randy Jackson because Bourgeois Tag opened up for Bonnie Hayes, and he came to see, Bourgeois Tag, but we hit it off, and then he wanted me to play on some tracks for him and his wife, Liz Jackson, his ex-wife now.
Sure, yeah.
And then Randy started bringing me into like sessions with Narda Michael Walden where I would come and blow a rock and roll guitar solo over a dance track that they would release for these European, British dance bands and stuff.
That was the second time I met you, was at the Automat and you were sitting back there. You were sitting in one of the rooms with Randy. And
wow. How do you remember all this stuff?
You made a huge impression on me.
Wow.
And we're going to work up to the third time we met.
Oh my God, this is crazy. You're blowing my mind.
And so Randy, when you and Randy were sitting together, I knew Randy because he had worked with the singer that was in my band, Nina Markert, she was a singer before me, she was a singer in an all-girl band called Rocks. Sort of like the predecessor to the Runaway style band. Anyway, so Randy and I, we had met a couple times, and he would help me get Jackson guitar. No relation to him, of course, but he had the Jackson endorsement, I think, at the time, and he gave me Grover's name and number, and then they came up. They were trying to sell guitars to Guitar Center at the time, and anyway, and so I got a Jackson guitar. That's gonna be important later for the next
Well, I mean, yeah, it's so weird, all this connective tissue between us, and I'm thankful you're remembering. I mean, some of the stuff, I don't know if it's just getting older and things becoming a blur, but things just happen. Things just happen kind of quickly out of that Bonnie Hayes gig, and that gave me instant validation. And Randy, as soon as you told people in the Bay Area, I plan on a Randy Jackson session. Sure. It was like, oh, hey, can you come play on my thing?
Yeah.
They didn't even ask her. They didn't care they just assumed you could play.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sure. Well, Randy wasn't going to have anybody that couldn't play and working with him.
Yeah, no, and he was a huge mentor to me. I mean, I still look up to the guy.
Oh yeah.
And I haven't seen him in years, but he took me under his wing. We would have hours and hours of hangs and conversations, and he saw something in me maybe I didn't see in myself, and he wanted to help nourish that, and I'm forever grateful that he gave me that time and ability to be around him, because just immersed around him. A lot of people think of him as just as a celebrity now, but back then, I mean, he was the real deal player.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
He played on the demo for my band. Our bass player, the engineer fired our bass player, the producer fired our bass player. And Randy came in and played bass on our demo, and, and made it sound much better than it should have sounded.
That's funny. It's kind of not quite the same thing, but a similar connection is I ended up playing with a band called Taxi.
Oh yeah, of course,
and
Randy's band.
They were like an early MTV band, you know.
Yep.
And Randy was the bass player in Taxi, and I played with Taxi after they lost their record deal, and they were trying to get a new record deal, and Randy was long gone with Narda Michael Walden and all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, another connection to Randy and his sort of legacy in the Bay Area as well, preceding legacy.
Yeah. So after playing with Randy, where did you go?
Okay, so Randy, I met a guy named Corey Lirios, who was in a band called Pablo Cruz.
A huge band, West Coast and the Bay Area especially.
Yes, and what's funny, as a kid in Virginia and Florida, I used to stay up like we all did late at night and watch Don Kirshner's rock concert.
Absolutely.
In concert, the other kind of variation of that.
Or Midnight Special.
It's exactly. Those were the only, Midnight Special, the only things that were on that I could catch live bands playing or real music. And in addition to Austin City Limits, I would watch like Roy Clark's TV show, or I'd watch Jim Stafford's TV show.
Yes.
Great guitar players, right?
Absolutely.
So I was just consumed. So I remember seeing Pablo Cruz playing when I'm like 14 years old, maybe 15 years old, right? What you gonna do when she says goodbye? Right? And that was one of their big hits, right?
Yeah.
So then years later, again in the Bay Area, I'm probably talking 86, 87 maybe, I meet Corey Lirios. I give him a cassette tape of my guitar playing, and I just say, hey, Corey, I'm Greg. I play guitar. If you know of anybody might like my guitar playing, here's a cassette, and please, give me a holler, whatever. And he called me that night at 10 o'clock at night, and he goes, hey, Greg, this is Corey. I was just listening to your cassette tape. Hey, you're a pretty good guitar player. We should get together and play sometime. I'm like, Corey? Yeah, for sure. I would love to. Whenever, man. And he's like, well, what are you doing now? I'm like, I'm driving to your house now. Where do you live? and he's like, great. I'm living in Stinson Beach, which was like 45 minutes away. I lived in like San Rafael at the time, Anyway, so I go over to his house. We end up playing till like 4:30 in the morning. He always, he loved my playing. And he's always like, when I get some paying gigs, some stuff I'm working on, I'll bring you in. And so, we kept playing and jamming. And he eventually got a TV show called Max Headroom.
Oh, okay, of course.
Where, Corey transitioned from live music at that time to doing a film composer, TV composing.
Yep.
So he brought me in on Max Headroom, and I played. There was only one season of that show, and I played the guitar on that. Funny enough, that show still comes on the Bravo channel now. It's got a bit of a cult following, and that was a really very cool, futuristic kind of vibey show.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then that led into Corey getting other shows, which then eventually, that he brought me in on, and then he eventually got Baywatch. And he brought me in on Baywatch. By that time, I had moved down to L.A. Okay. But he brought me in, and Corey had also moved down to L.A. Played on like 4 seasons of Baywatch with Corey. And, during those interims, I got a gig with Ronnie Montrose, was my first real touring gig. So I can back up a little bit. So while that Corey stuff and Randy Jackson stuff was sort of percolating in San Rafael in Marin County, San Francisco, I got recommended to play with Ronnie Montrose. He was putting a band together to support a record called Speed of Sound.
Sure.
And so Ronnie calls me, and he was very sort of intense and very, very dry-witted. I didn't really know what to expect of him. Yeah. And of course, I had Montrose records, when I was a kid,
as we all did.
And and exactly, it was part of our soundtrack of our youth, right? I played Bad Motor Scooter, when I was 15 years old in the clubs in Florida, and I'm talking to the guy,
Yep.
When he comes to my house, he didn't want me to come to his house. He's like, "Where do you live?" And I'm like, "Oh, in San Rafael." He's like, "Oh yeah, I know where that is. I'll be right there." So he shows up. He brings a guitar in without a case, sits down, and he says, "Let's play a little." And we just played unplugged on my couch.
Wow.
For like, I don't know, 15 minutes. I don't even remember what we played. We just jammed in some whatever. He got up and he goes, "Okay, well, nice to meet you. I'll see you Monday at 10 a.m. I'm like, what are you talking about? Monday? What are you talking about? And he's like, "You got the gig." I'm like, so I said, "I got the gig? What, to tour with you?" He's like, "Yeah, unless you don't want to tour with me." And he was so dry-witted. I think he was just really pushing my buttons, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, "Of course, Mr. Montrose." He goes, "It's Ronnie. It's Ronnie." And so that's how I got the gig with Ronnie Montrose, auditioning unplugged on my couch.
Yep. Which leads us to the third time we met, because we opened for you guys at the Stone in San Francisco. Wow. My band opened for you guys. And
what was the name of your band?
St Laurent at the time.
Oh yeah, okay, I do remember the name.
And well, thank you. It's the name of a designer in France too.
Oh no! But that was the last gig of the tour, I think. That's when I moved to LA. That night, I moved to LA after that gig.
And that guitar, that Jackson guitar that Randy helped me get, I broke a string on the very first song. And somebody threw it back to you guys, and you guys were kind enough to change that. And because I needed that guitar to
you guys
changed the string really quick, and then and I was good to go. And
my God.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the Stone. Come on, what a great club that was in terms of like the history of the Bay. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It was a fabulous club. It was a shame when it went away.
Yeah, I used to play the Fab Mab, the Blue Gardens across the street.
Yep, of course.
Yeah,
Rock on Broadway above that. And yes.
That's right. Wow, I used to. Wow, that's good times, man. Really good times.
Yeah. Exactly.
Wow, that's so funny. We crossed paths on that, and that might have been, maybe that was our last time, because like I said, after that show, I literally packed up my '69 convertible Mustang with my amp, had my clothes in the trunk, and I moved to LA the next day. That night. I drove down all night.
Yeah. You guys, that tour you guys supported, or it was like co-support with Allan Holdsworth?
Yes, exactly. It was a co-headline tour where one night we would open for Allan, and then the next night he would open for us. And the greatest thing with that, well, there were so many great things. Getting to play with Ronnie Montrose every night. And I guess I want to maybe take a slight detour for a second.
Sure.
Growing up in Virginia and the Florida Panhandle, as I mentioned, having these records that I grew up with, I never imagined as a punk kid that I would ever make music, share the stage, be asked to be recognized as a peer with some of these musicians and players,
Yeah.
And then looking back on it now, I hit the lottery. When you mention different levels of success as players, and some people go on to this or that, man, I feel like I hit the lottery.
Oh, yeah.
Playing with Ronnie. I toured with Buddy Miles, or I should say I survived with Buddy Miles for about 4 years, and then of course, Corey, and then later on I went to play with Double Trouble from Stevie Ray's band. And so I've had all these truly amazing opportunities that I'm forever grateful for. I never played with anybody at like the pinnacle of their success. I always used to joke that I always played with these artists on their mortgage tour, on the backside of their career, But it doesn't matter to me, man. It's still to sit, on a bus or a van with Montrose, with the Holdsworth stuff. We were in a van, and that was incredible. Getting to be friends with Allan Holdsworth and hang out with him, get drunk with Allan Holdsworth, just me and him, And me and Allan really hit it off. I never asked him anything about guitar or music, because everybody was always like, Allan, can we measure the connective tissue between your index finger and your ring finger? We'd like to figure out how anatomically you can stretch to. And I was just like, Allan, what do you do when you don't talk about guitar? He's like, well, Greg, I like to make beer and drink beer and ride my bike. Oh, wow. He was into road biking at the time, And I do have one funny story that happened with Allan. So he called me up. He's like, Greg, I'm in room 287. I've got a fresh bottle of rum. Come on up. So he loved hanging out with me, I think, because like I said, he could just be like Allan instead of Guitar God, right?
Sure.
Because I mean, what am I going to ask Allan Holdsworth? I was just a punk kid playing A minors and E minors, and he's the Zen master, Hendrix, alien musician from another universe.
Absolutely.
So I brought my guitar up with me this particular time. He was just fumbling around on it. We're just drinking. He told me a lot of crazy stories about his youth and upbringing. I don't even know how many have been revealed, but he was just fumbling around. I said, Allan, and we're all, by this time we're pretty buzzed. We're pretty buzzed in the drum. And I go, Allan, hey man, can you do me a favor? He's like, sure, Greg, anything. What do you want? I said, can you play the intro to Johnny Be Good on my guitar? And he started laughing, and he goes, of course. And then he played it like note for note.
Wow.
And we both he just roared and laughed, or rolling on the bed, because nobody ever asked him to play Johnny Be Good. And I so wish I had a video camera, mobile phone to record that. It was hilarious. And that's the only time I asked him to play anything, and it was a really beautiful moment with the guy.
That's great.
So.
That's fantastic.
and I had no shame. I thought, like, I'm going to ask him what's he going to say? No.
Yeah. Exactly.
And he did it. It was brilliant. So such a sweet guy.
So when you packed up your stuff and you moved to LA, where did you know anybody down? I mean, you knew Corey, But was there anybody else? Did you start playing in a band down there?
Well, not right away. What I actually had gotten an audition called the Cruzados, and they were called the Plugs initially. They used to play Mabuhay Garden. They're from the LA. They did their kind of big claim to fame. They did the soundtrack for Repo Man, that crazy movie with Harry Dean Stanton. Kind of spaghetti westerny, surfy a little bit. And so I got with them. They needed the guitar player was out, and so I had to get down there. And I had one friend from the Bay Area lived down there in East LA, and it was a guy named John Alderetti. He goes by Juan Alderetti now.
Of course,
he's
from Racer X.
Bass player from Racer X. Yeah, I got him the gig in Racer X.
Oh, cool.
You know? Oh, sorry. I shouldn't say I got him the gig. I was friends with Paul Gilbert because we were in that thing that Mike Varney put on.
Yeah, the Spotlight thing.
Yeah, the Spotlight column. And me and Paul became friends. And he asked me when I moved to LA if I knew any. Actually, it was a couple of years before when he got the gig. If I knew anybody, I recommended Alderetti, and Alderetti got the gig with Paul Gilbert. So for Racer X, as you mentioned. Yeah. And so when I moved back down officially after that Montrose tour, this would have been in end of '88. I moved down with John in a house in East LA with him and Bruce Boulier. Okay. And the other guitar player from Racer X at the time. Yep. So I was just there for maybe a month or two till I got my own place. And then I got a gig with Buddy Miles, actually.
Wow.
That Buddy gig came about because I had played on a commercial for him. When I was in the Bay Area, before moving to LA, I was actually starting to do some commercials. Like I played on like a Hardee's commercial and a Coca-Cola commercial. And I did one of the California Raisins commercials with Buddy Miles.
Oh, wow.
That's great. So he liked my guitar playing. We recorded that at the record plant in Sausalito.
Yeah.
And he called me V. He's like, V, man, we're definitely gonna hook up again in the future. And sure enough, he called me. He found out I moved to LA. I don't know where, how it got around, but he called me on a Thursday, and he's like, V, I got some gigs coming up. Can you come play guitar with me? And I need a guitar player. And it was like, when's the first gig? And he's like, Friday night. So I rode out that night on the bus, learned like 20 plus some odd songs on the bus out to play the gig the next night. And the funny thing with that band, playing with Buddy, of course, was incredible.
Sure, what a large personality.
Oh my God, he was enormous, not only in physical stature but presence. Buddy was the most charismatic individual I think I've ever played with.
Wow.
And he was incredible. And when he played drums, the groove, the beat, and I'm just a guy playing, from Virginia, eating mayonnaise and Pringles sandwiches, playing with this behemoth of a groove meister, and just trying to hold on, know. Yeah. And Buddy was hilarious. He really plays on the back of the beat a lot. Mm-hmm. And back in those days, he did a fair amount of drugs, so he would be even further back. So sometimes we'd get done with the gig, and I would be, Buddy, man, you're so far behind the beat tonight. He's like, yeah, that's where I like to lay it down. That's where the ladies like it, And I was like, yeah, but you're so far behind the beat, you're almost Russian. And he loved it because it was like implying that he was rushing the beat before that, right?
Yeah.
And so he cracked up on that. And so, Buddy was hilarious. I mean, he was funny. Sound checks were as long or longer than the gig.
Wow.
Because he grew up in that era where you didn't put your instrument down. You just always played.
Sure. Absolutely.
So amazing play with Buddy Miles. And I think it was Alderetti who told me, he's like, man, you played with the rhythm sections of the two of the greatest rock guitar players of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Stevie Ray's rhythm section, Double Trouble, and of course Buddy Miles with Band of Gypsies. And I'd never thought of that. And again, back to just being a punk kid from Virginia and Florida, man, I'm still so grateful I've had these opportunities. Truly, no jive, truly grateful.
And how did you get the gig with Double Trouble?
Okay, so typical story of mine, I move around a lot. I have a bit of wanderlust, moving from Florida to San Francisco to LA. Well, my wife and I ended up moving to, I think so, a little bit of that from my parents. So we moved to Austin, and I didn't know anybody in Austin. But I knew I wanted to get a place that was a music town and maybe was affordable to live, like we could maybe buy a home finally.
Yeah.
Because we've been renting all these years. So we moved there, and I did the whole thing, go to music stores, go to clubs and try to jam. And some bass player heard me I can't remember his name now, or I'd give him, I'd say him. He's a good bass player, a guy named Robert something. Anyways, he asked me to come down and sit in his band. I sat with his band, and they gave me the gig in their band that night.
Wow.
And then it was down on 6th Street, which is like their main row of clubs.
Sure. Yep.
Then I started Malford Milligan, who was a black albino singer.
Yes, of course. Malford.
Yes, from Storyville.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, played with David Grissom for a long time, and
exactly, and that was
Greg Koch.
Right, and Storyville was Chris and Tommy of Chris Layton and Tommy Shannon of Double Trouble.
Yep.
So when Chris and Tommy, after Stevie Ray had died, they put out a record called "Been a Long Time," and I still was doing a few dates with Buddy Miles at the time, and we did one where Double Trouble played on just as a guest rhythm section with some Austin guys. And they heard me play, and they liked my playing. And for short, I ran into them in a deli after 3 months of living in Austin. And I just went up to them and said, hey, I'm that guitar player with Buddy Miles that we just did a gig like a month ago. And Buddy got in a fight backstage. He was brawling with somebody. And Chris Layton put up his hands like he was going to fight me because it was a reference to the brawl backstage. And I said, no, man. I'm a lover, not a fighter, Chris. He goes, okay, good. And I said, listen, if you guys ever need a guitar player, I'd love to play with you guys.
Yeah.
And a week later, they call me saying, hey, good timing. We're putting this record out that Doyle Bramall's on, Charlie Sexton's producing and playing on, Kenny Wayne Shepherd's on.
Wow.
All these great guitar players are on it, but they can't tour. So would you like to be our touring guitar player? And I'm like, yeah. So I went from nothing to playing with Double Trouble in 3 months.
Wow.
Which is terrifying because, of course, the legacy of Stevie.
Sure.
And of course, I don't play anything like Stevie Ray Vaughan, but that was a good thing because they didn't want a Stevie Ray Vaughan guy.
No,
that's not what they were about.
Yeah.
They were moving on, and how are you ever going to try to replicate that?
Yeah.
Impossible.
Exactly.
So I was a versatile player. And I could cop those other guys' vibes on the records, and that's what they needed. They needed somebody who had good tone, good feel, and it worked out. I toured with them for 7 months.
Wow.
And then that tour ended. My wife got an ultimatum with her job to move back to LA or be laid off. So we had to decide, stay in Austin or keep her job, which is what kept us alive.
Yeah.
in the long run of things.
Yeah.
And so we chose to move back to Los Angeles.
Okay. And have you been there since?
No. I'm part of the witness relocation plan. So we moved to Nashville.
Okay.
In 2006. So we moved back from Austin to LA. We moved in 2001. And I have a love-hate relationship with LA. As I mentioned, such a big town. There's a lot of opportunity in LA, but it's so expensive to live, and traffic's bad, and the intense energy of people and gang violence at that time was just a stressful place to live, So I wanted to kind of go back to what I grew up in, trees and seasons and a little more of a Southern influence. And Nashville seemed like the best choice of that because it was a music town as well.
Yep.
I had put out a record right before I moved, maybe a year or two before I moved to Nashville. I put out a solo record called Tailgate Troubadour.
Yep, a wonderful record.
And I'm sorry?
A wonderful record.
Oh, well, you've heard it. Thank you.
Yeah, I have heard
it,
yes.
Well, thank you very much. And I get, people ask me, well, were you trying to be a solo guitar player like Joe Satriani? And I'm like, no. That's never how I've ever envisioned myself. I always saw myself as somebody's Mike Campbell, somebody who could play with like Tom Petty for 40 years,
Sure.
But I never found my Tom Petty. I kept finding, all these other gigs along the way to pay the bills, So I was basically a sideman. And what happens is when you're a sideman, whenever you meet someone like in a club or in a studio and, get introduced, they're always like, well, who have you played with? And I would, I'd have to say, well, I played with, Buddy Miles. Yeah. And you could literally see them putting like a box around you, a dotted line, like, oh, you must be a 60s psychedelic Hendrixy guitar player. And I'm like, no, I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
Oh, who else have you worked with? Oh, Colin Hay I toured with Colin Hay from Men at Work, the singer for Men at Work.
Yep.
Oh, you must be a skinny tie, Vegemite sandwich, new wave guy. I'm not that guy either, And so on, Stevie Ray, Double Trouble. Oh, you must be a Texas blues gunslinger. No. So I decided to make a record as basically a deluxe business card, I used to call it.
Okay.
And that record just turned into basically sharing what my heart and soul was as a musician of where I could play anything I wanted to play. Yeah. I wasn't being dictated by the gig or the parameters of what somebody else's music was, kind of having me play within, which is a fine thing to do, but I had complete freedom and autonomy.
Yeah.
So I made a record.
Yeah.
And
that's Tonescapes. It felt like just like paintings with sound. Wonderful playing. But like,
well, thank you.
Paintings with sound.
Well, yeah, and it's wonderful you say it because I think a lot of the influence of Corey Lirios, like playing to picture, whenever we did Max Headroom and Baywatch, we always had the monitor up. You had to. I might have only played like a little flourish of harmonics. Somebody's walking in the room and Baywatch, Hasselhoff running down the beach in slow motion, and you play a low groany E string or something with a whammy bar. So I learned the value of playing very minimalist, and I learned the value of playing where you could have the listener almost feel like they're walking amongst the notes, like you mentioned.
Very good.
And so I kind of made a record where, I play lap steel, I play baritone, regular guitar, acoustic, dobro, square neck dobro, slide. And I basically, each of my 12 songs, I look at them as short movies, and the instruments are like actors. And I would cast the instruments as like actors. Like on one song, I might have only lap steel and baritone. And I'd be like the director. Okay, you're going to have a dialogue. There's going to be a 3.5-4 minute short movie of dialogue between these instruments. And that's how I approached the record. And fortunately, it resonated with some guitar players. And unbeknownst to me, I mean, your magazine, Vintage Guitar, you guys did a review of it, and which was wonderful. Yeah. And you guys gave me a whole page story on it and my playing, which was, again, wonderful, because I never, ever expected. I just thought, well, it's not a shred record, because so many guitar players, oftentimes you think of a solo guitar record from American rock guitar player, you think it's going to be more like technical and shreddy,
sure,
as opposed to a flamenco solo record or something,
Exactly.
And so I wasn't that. I've always been a song guy. I root my guitar playing around an arrangement, and I try to just hang ornaments where they need to be on that arrangement, or I don't put any ornaments on it if I don't think I can contribute anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that sort of has been the value I maybe have added to playing to artists as a side band, where they never had to worry about me stepping on the vocal.
Yep. Exactly. When you were in Nashville, did you know Tom Bukovac?
Well, I met Tom prior via. He was a Bogner user.
Sure.
Bogner amp user. And Kenny Greenberg, who's another session player, and Jerry McPherson, another great session player. These three guys were like the kind of top 5 guys probably at the time in Nashville.
Sure.
Bukovac probably still is, but we became friends. And I told Tom, we were talking one day, I sent him all my record, and they all wrote back or called me. Jerry McPherson's like, what are you using? What amps? What guitars? Blah, blah, blah. They were all super supportive of my playing, and I said, hey, I'm thinking of moving to Nashville. And Bukovac is like, hey, man, if you need a place to crash while you do a little recon mission, I got bedrooms in my house I've never even been in. Why don't you come stay with me? and I took him up on it. And me and Tom developed a really close relationship while I would come visit him. And then I ended up buying a house 2 houses away from him.
Oh, really?
Because it was a really cool house that came on the market, had an elevator in it and everything.
Oh, wow.
It was like wicked cool. So we ended up being neighbors and hanging out all the time. And, when these guys like you, they immediately, as soon as I hit the ground running in Nashville, they dropped gigs to me.
Wow.
And I was so fortunate, because that's not normal in Nashville, and I, again, it's not like I didn't put my street cred in. I just didn't do any street cred in Nashville. But in Nashville, sometimes it could be, some of the players could be a bit, like, well, you haven't been in Nashville they used to call it a 5-year town. You got to be here 5 years before anything could sort of happen. And I never believed in that ever. I just thought, hey man, if you were the right kind of chili dog, and you walked into the right kind of barbecue,
sure,
you might get a gig, you might get an opportunity. And that's what happened with these guys helping me out.
Very cool.
That's
awesome.
So Tom, learned a lot from him. He's such a brilliant musician outside of session guy.
Sure.
Just his guitar playing or his musicality, I should say, whether it's keyboards or guitar, is extraordinary.
Yeah, that's great. Let me ask you, David Halliday, how did you end up working with him?
Wow. Yes. Well, okay. So David was the son of Johnny Halliday, Johnny Halliday was kind of like the
Europe's Elvis, the Europe's Elvis.
Yes, he was like exactly right. And so nobody in America knows Johnny Halliday except for you and maybe 5 other people who speak French. So I got a gig with David Halliday, and that was through Derek Sherinian, who he's a keyboard player.
Sure.
Yeah, Derek I used to tour with Buddy Miles. That was his first gig, was with Buddy Miles. So we got to be, we were buddy for, as I mentioned. Derek was probably in the band for a couple of years, and I stayed with Buddy a couple more years after that. But Derek, went on to Kiss and Alice Cooper, and then Black Country Communion, and now he's a solo artist. He's been doing many records. So, and Dream Theater, of course, So, and I just shot his record because I'm a photographer now. So, long story short, Derek was playing with David Halliday. He got me the gig with Halliday, and then I started playing with him for a few years. We put out a couple records. One was a live record of Halliday songs, and then we actually put a band together called Blind Fish, and I spent a year playing and touring in Europe with Halliday, and it wasn't a highlight musically playing with that guy because he had really no sense of identity. I'm going to be blunt here, but I was on retainer, which was awesome. So I was surfing half the year in LA, and the other half of the year I was in Europe playing. And musically, I could do whatever I wanted. So it was really good on that end. And I got a chance, like I said, to be in Europe, and it was a great opportunity to see many countries on a record label's budget.
Sure.
Sure. So and then that ended not long. Well, I'm trying to think what happened after that. Colin Hay, maybe I think, and just various different projects here or there.
Yeah. When did you start doing YouTube demo videos?
Yeah. Okay. So that was a complete unexpected, I guess, for a simple word. I got an amp called a Cream of Wheat by an amp maker named Adam Palau. Tungsten amps. And it's basically a Tweed Deluxe. And I was bored one day in Nashville, and I thought, well, man, maybe I could just set up my little laptop computer and set up a microphone, and I'll just do a quick demo. I've seen some demos on YouTube of amps, and I'll just throw this up on YouTube. Long story short, that demo started immediately gaining thousands of views.
Oh, man.
And it was my first video I'd ever done, so there's no production value at all. It's well recorded, though, in terms of the audio.
Yep.
And the amp maker called me up, and he's like, Greg, I don't know what you did, but my phone is ringing off the hook.
Oh, wow.
Peter Frampton has actually called about this because he saw your video. Peter Frampton, sorry, but he thinks you're a great player. He wants to order one. He's like, I thought I was going to have to stop making amps because and go out of business, but your video saved my business. And a light bulb went off in my head, like, wait a minute, maybe I can stay home, not tour, because I didn't want to go on the road much anymore. The glamour of being on tour buses playing the same set of music had really grown out of favor to me. I wasn't enjoying it anymore.
Sure.
I wanted to be home with my wife and sleep in the same bed. And the money also, the touring money was going down. Some artists were offering the same money I was making 15, 20 years ago.
Yep.
And so I was like thinking, well, I need to diversify. I need to figure something out here. So this video opportunity just kind of dropped in my lap, and I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to make video demos, not reviews. I made sure to not do reviews because, it's a slippery slope when you start saying how amazing everything is, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I would just demo the gear and let people decide if they liked it or not, and not really be inserting of my opinion one way or the other. That led to more and more videos being made and companies calling me and paying me to demo their gear, which led me to taking trying to take good photographs and good video of the gear, which led me now for the last 10 years pretty much where I'm exclusively shooting video photography. So now it's kind of like I came full circle. I'm still back with musicians, but instead of a guitar in my hand, I've got the camera in my hand, And it's been great. Doing demos, I still do a lot for a lot of companies, but I'm really not in front of the camera much anymore.
Okay.
I'm shooting and directing other guitar players, which I'd rather have it that way because the demo world's gotten increasingly complex in terms of there's a lot of people doing it.
Yes, exactly.
And then a lot of people are starting to call some of these guys shills and things like that because they feel like they might be demoing a piece of gear, but they're telling you how great it is, but it may not be great, and they're just doing it for the money. And I can understand some people having questions about who's demoing a piece of gear, and as I mentioned, I always just tried to be neutral about it and just say, hey, here's how this amp or pedal or guitar sounds in my hands on this day that I filmed it.
Sure. Sure.
So I'd much rather be in the production side of things, behind the camera these days. Which is how I make my living.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. It's funny that that's so music now, and likewise the art of photography. Two ways that these days, at least, are very hard to make a living. And you've managed to pull it off. How hard is it?
That's questionable.
Yeah, how hard is it to make money and not have people steal your photographs and all that?
Well, that's an excellent question. Thank you. So there's a reason I never won the lottery. I've never exactly chosen the right aspect of how to make money in this life. However, I always followed my heart, like Napoleon Dynamite says. So I guess I'm doing the right thing. No, but in reality, it's very difficult in this day and age to do any artful endeavor, whether a journalist, even for that matter, right? To being photographer, to being painter. It's very difficult to make a living that is consistent. So the word I like to use now, and I even talk about this when I meet young musicians as well, is to diversify.
Sure.
And the way I've diversified is when I learned about working a camera, I didn't just learn still photography. I learned to do video at the same time, which has been incredibly valuable because there are many still photographers in the past who are big names who don't know how to shoot video or edit video or record sound and how to tell a story in a video format.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they have really suffered. And some of them were huge names back in the day. They had a lot of difficulty. However, visual artists who are good at video, I mean, as long as I can put a light on something and put a lens in front of it, I can shoot anything, and tell a story. It could be a piece of jewelry. It could be a guitar. It could be somebody's record that I'm making an EPK for or something. But there's the irony is with the internet, there's more and more need for imagery than ever before.
Yeah.
However, a lot of companies don't necessarily want to pay for it as much as they used to,
Certainly. Certainly.
Like back in the day when, just be pre-internet, a magazine ad saying Guitar Player magazine, maybe a full page ad. I don't know. It might have been $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for a full page ad.
Yep.
And that was for a static image that was good for 2-3 months while the magazine was on the coffee table.
Sure.
And you had to flip the page to find that magazine ad. And you had to pay a photographer to shoot the picture of the product, and maybe an art illustrator or a graphic artist to lay out the ad. So the expenditures were quite high. And nowadays you can get a video made that can literally reach billions of people potentially in a matter of seconds upon release.
Sure.
And it's as good as long as it's floating out into the ether of the internet. That video never dies. It's not what do you call it? Where it doesn't have a date of expiration.
Sure. Absolutely.
And the thing is, it's trying to, companies will spend the money when they see the value in what you're making.
Yeah.
But a lot of people see a video now that was made with, say, an iPhone. And iPhones can make great videos. I've made so much stuff on iPhones that people don't even know. But it all still comes down to composition and lighting and understanding the story, the bigger story that you're trying to work with. But the thing is, people see a 5-minute video and they think it takes you 6 minutes to make it.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
And that's not true.
No,
it can take a week or 2 weeks to make a 5-minute video.
Yeah.
And dependent upon the complexity of the storyline, the B-roll, what is there interview footage combined with artist footage, combined with, product footage and content and making sure fact checking, all that. There's a lot of variables that go into it that make a super slick video that goes by so quickly, make you think that it could be done for like $500.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And you can't make it on $500. I mean, you see Mercedes and BMW, they sell you cars in 20 seconds, but they spend, $250,000 or more on those ads.
Absolutely.
And they don't even show you what's under the hood.
No.
They're just showing you the hot chick next to you in the passenger seat, saying you're going to get laid if you buy this car,
exactly.
you know, and there you go. I wish it was that easy with a guitar.
It's all about feelings now.
Exactly. You know, so. But I mean, I was just going to just say that, you know, it's wonderful. I mean, having all these opportunities in terms of, you know, young players being able to see all this content, it's incredible.
Oh,
I mean, look at like NAMM show. We didn't have a NAMM show with COVID, and from what I've been hearing amongst my friends in the business, you know, their sales and many MI companies have not suffered. Many of them just have increased because people are staying at home more.
Yeah, Keo, you just ask Keo, and he'll tell you that this has probably been one of their best years ever.
Yes, and the expenditure of NAMM, I mean, in my opinion, pre-COVID, NAMM has been a bit of I don't know if it's really been necessary other than just meeting up with friends and family I haven't seen since the previous NAMM. Yeah. Because, you know, back in the day, it would be, you'd unveil your new product, you know, and back in the 50s and the 60s and 70s. But now with the internet, you know, you can unveil a new product every day if you wanted to, any time of the year, you know?
I think for the most part, it's a social. Anyway, on my level, it's since I have nothing to sell, it is a social. It's a social thing.
Yeah, and it's a great thing in that I understand, but it's just expensive for a lot of companies to rationalize spending tens of thousands, if not the big companies spending hundreds of thousands.
Yes,
exactly.
For
products that some of them just get lost in the shuffle because, you know, there's so many product releases around NAMM time. It's hard to get anybody to pay attention unless your product is really exceptional and revolutionary. Eventually that stuff, the cream will always rise, you know?
Yeah, let's hope so. do you see like mailbox money from the music you did, like Baywatch and stuff like that? Do you still see money coming in?
Well, no. All of that stuff that I did with Corey, I was just worked for hire.
Okay.
I was not the composer. So Corey's the one who's raking in the big red, you know?
Because there's a Baywatch channel on my TV that plays 24 hours Baywatch.
Oh my God. I mean, you know what's funny now is it's a horrible show. I mean, sorry. When you got Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, you know, Ozark, you got all these, you know, just great shows out. And then you look at it is the, you know, it's silicone chess and jet skis crashing into each other.
Well,
you know?
to your credit, it's a music video.
Yeah, well, I guess there's always a montage sequence in the series that I think I played on 3 or 4. I think it was four seasons, and there was every show there was always slow motion montage where Corey could do a 2-minute extrapolated piece of music, and he'd always, you know, they wanted more guitar in that show than keyboards because, you know, it's the beach, it's rock and roll,
exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
And but no, I don't get any money from that. I mean, my record still sells on. It's no longer available in CD form, but on iTunes, I still get mailbox money from that.
Oh, cool.
But basically, you know, it's just really lunch money. It's like, oh, hey, look, I got some money for sushi tonight. You know,
good.
So
Sushi's
you know,
not cheap.
so well, yeah, exactly. So at the end of the day, it's just, you know, if I work, I get paid. I do a lot of shooting for Yamaha.
Okay.
And Ampeg.
Yep.
And Line 6.
Sure.
You know, Yamaha owns that umbrella, and I do a lot of stuff with George Trips and Dunlop for Way Huge.
Yeah, of course.
You know.
Yeah. And
then I just do, you know, different records. I just shot Rick Holmstrom, who's a great blues guitar player with Mavis Staples.
Okay.
Just shot some promo shots for him. And Derek Sherinian's last record, I shot his artwork for his record.
Great.
You know, and yeah, so it's starting, you know, it's one of those things. It's like, it's just like being a guitar player. These musicians, you know, a lot of times they'll call me because they know I'm a musician.
Yeah.
So there's a comfort level associated with that, working with somebody who's behind the camera, that I know when a guitar looks stupid. I know if don't hold the guitar like that. That looks bad.
It's upside down.
And I'm not afraid to tell people that.
Yeah.
I'm just like, look, our goal is to get a great image. I could take a picture of you holding it really stupid, but thank God it's not film. We're not wasting a piece of film.
Yeah.
But anyways, so my word of mouth is how I get all my work. I don't do a whole lot of like, you know, sending cold call emails out to people. I've done that in the past, and sometimes I get work out of it, and sometimes, you know, you never get a reply. So It's usually just word of mouth.
Yeah, word of the mouth is always the best way.
It is, yeah, because then people sort of they might know a little more about your personality because somebody spoke about how you work, or hey, trust this guy, he'll take bullets for you. Yeah. He's not going to just phone it in or whatever.
Exactly.
You know. So,
do you have a collection of vintage gear at all?
No, I pretty much sold off. Yeah, I pretty much sold off everything. I used to have a lot of great stuff. Not any like 59 Pauls or 54 Strats or anything like that. But I mean, I used to have a bunch of old blackface Fender amps, and I had a 59 Gretsch Jet Firebird, Jet Red one.
Yeah.
And I used to have a Vibroverb, a 63 Vibroverb, the 210 brown face, the rarest amp Fender ever made was reverb, for onboard reverb. And I sold that for, I think, $6,000 to pay for my record, actually.
Wow.
Then it went up to like $12,000, and who knows where it's at now. Probably dropped back down. And then I used to have a super. Yeah, probably. And then I had. Oh, it didn't.
It did absolutely not.
No. Oh, I have no idea what those are worth now. But I had a '68 Super Tremolo 100-watt Plexi that got stolen with my Black Les Paul Custom as well.
Oh no.
And a late '60s Telly that got stolen the same time.
Oh, no.
I don't know their serial numbers, so I don't really put that out there.
Yeah.
Because there's some things about those guitars, that Telly, I could identify because it was, the finish. I stripped the finish and all that, so the grain pattern is very easy to see.
Yeah.
But anyways, so yeah, what I have now is enough. If I got called for a gig tomorrow, I could go tour.
Okay.
I've got that Creamy Wheat Tweed Deluxe, and I've got a Swart AST Pro, which I love to death.
Absolutely.
They're both low. Yeah, they're both low wattage 112 combos with reverb. You know?
Yep.
Well, the Creamy Wheat doesn't. It's just a straight Tweed Deluxe, but it's a badass amp.
Yep.
And then I've got a 20-year-old Fender Nocaster, custom shop, which is a killer guitar. And I got a 335, a historic 335 fat neck. And that's it for electric guitars. And then I have a couple acoustics. I've got a Waterloo ladder braced, kind of like a copy of an old Kalamazoo KG11 that they make.
Yep.
And it's a great guitar. I've got a Martin D18 Golden Era Dreadnought, which is amazing. An ukulele, H-string ukulele, killer Kamaka, a Mando guitar, and a bass for if I do some recording at home. And that's it. Wow. And a pedal. I actually just bought a new pedal board. I hadn't had a pedal board for the last year. I bought a new updated pedal train, which I love.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah, I sold off a lot of vintage gear. I'm not a collector. I always just looked at everything as tools.
Sure.
And if I wasn't using a tool, I never held on to it because I always sold it to buy other tools that I could use. So, and I've never really wanted things back that I've sold, except for that Les Paul Custom we talked about that my parents bought me. Yeah. That's the only one that stings a lot now because they're dead. Yeah, my parents are gone, But yeah, I mean, I don't, listen, I love old guitars. I love old gear, but there's so much good stuff being made nowadays.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, I think what really trumps all gear, in my opinion, and I know it's probably going to piss off some of your listeners, but if you don't have a good song, if you don't have a great emotional performance, whether instrumentally or lyrically or something honest and believable, I don't care. You could have the whole track done through a Neve console with old microphones, right? Old mic pre's, right? And having old drums and old amps and old guitars. And then you could be playing some of the most banal Baywatch music ever onto the track, and no one's going to care.
Yeah.
It all comes down to the song and emotional performance.
Yes, exactly.
You don't listen to Aretha Franklin and go, "My God, I wonder was she singing through an SM7? What was she singing through?"
Well, there are some people that care about that.
But you know what? Hey, that's okay, because those are the guys you want designing the ABS brake systems on your car.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
But I don't want those guys in my band.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I don't. I want the guys who are bleeding back there and sweating and just pouring their essence and their identity and their life story into every downbeat.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, at the end of the day, Guthrie Trapp said it best. He says, it just a great guitar player in Nashville. I interviewed him, and he said, it all just comes down to a guy banging on a log sitting around a fire.
Yeah.
And when you distill it down to the most primal roots of music, it's groove. Okay. And everything's built off that. Don't get me wrong. I love killer players of all instruments and all art forms. But I'd rather hear somebody's personal identity than somebody trying to channel somebody else's identity through their playing because they copied Stevie Ray note for note or something.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, imagine if we did this whole interview and I was trying to be like Jimmy Stewart or John Wayne. well, let me tell you, James, when I was Pilgrim, you would be laughing at me. Who goes around imitating John Wayne their whole life? You know, exactly. Nobody. But you go around imitating other musicians and people go, well, he sounds just like it. It's like, no, you know, I wish he sounded like a bad version of himself than a great version of someone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And man, I know that sounds really harsh, but it's just where I'm at in this world these days.
Well, it's the reality is what it is.
And the irony is all the players that we all attribute to legacy status all have their own identity, don't they?
Yep. Oh yeah.
You know, you hear Hendrix, sure, he copies Curtis Mayfield, but he doesn't sound like Curtis Mayfield.
Not at all.
You know, Eddie Van Halen, he talks all day long about Eric Clapton. Sure. He doesn't sound anything like Eric Clapton.
And he talked about Alan Holdsworth all the time too.
Exactly, right?
Sound anything like Alan Holdsworth.
Right. So all the greats found their identity early, you know?
Yep.
And I'm going to say, if I could say one last thing, I don't know how far along we are in this, but something I've been, well, I feel like a lot of players in the past, maybe, I don't know how much more now, but people don't put a lot of emphasis on working on groove and working on controlling groove, like playing ahead of the beat, playing on the beat, playing behind the beat, playing a good shuffle, understanding what a shuffle's all about, different kinds of shuffles. And what happens is, in my opinion, the greatest of the greatest players that we all love, again, all the people we've mentioned, and, you know, to Miles Davis, to Stravinsky, to Mozart, they all, I guarantee you, had incredible locomotive sense of time built in their own DNA.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It was like Stevie Ray. If Chris Layton couldn't show up for a gig, nobody would miss Chris Layton because Stevie Ray was the locomotive in that band.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that's not a diss on Chris Layton. He's a great, great drummer.
Sure.
But Stevie Ray was the pulse. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so a lot of people will talk about technique and flash and all that, but you know what? Listen to these guys play. I just saw an old video of Ted Nugent just the other day on YouTube from the 90s doing it was one of those guitar, what do you call it? Like instructional things he was doing.
Sure.
And he was just going on and like Ted does. And he was hilarious. But I tell you what, his right hand rhythm was insane.
Oh yeah. Yes. Exactly.
They got to find it. I can't remember. It might have been one of those Stars Guitars videos or something. It's on YouTube. But go watch this guy's right hand. I don't care if you're a jazz guy or not, or you're just like, you dismiss rock players or dismiss Ted for politics or whatever. Yeah. You know, which I don't agree with. But his playing, his right hand is incredible.
Absolutely.
You know, and the greatest players, you know, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about how they just had an incredible sense of time. And that's a lot of what makes, well, not a lot. That's where all music starts. It's got to have that pulse, as I mentioned. I can't say that enough.
Yeah.
You
know, I think players I think we might have been the last generation where when we turned on the radio, we heard everything. You know, we heard country music. We heard like or some semblance of country music to some semblance of rock to R&B. It was just music, and they played it on the radio. And I think my kid brother, I don't think he had the benefit of that.
You're exactly right. And you know what? When I was a kid, I mean, I know I talked about Skinner, Nugent, but man, I had John Fahey records, Jim Croce records,
sure.
You know,
for
the great acoustic guitar player. I had Riders in the Sky, this great country western band.
I interviewed Ranger Doug. I love Ranger Doug.
You interviewed Ranger Doug?
I absolutely did. I love that man.
And Polly. Oh my God. I mean, Ranger Doug. I love Riders in the Sky. Are you kidding? You know? Oh my God. I mean, that was just, again, I love that. And I discovered them from Austin City Limits back in the 70s, you know? And that's why I discovered like David Grisman, the mandolin, hot dog music, Mark O'Connor. Mark O'Connor, I saw him playing with it. So I was a huge fan of the Dixie Dregs. I had Mahavishnu records. I had Steely Dan. I had everything. I had the Meters later on. Randy Jackson turned me on to the Meters.
Yeah,
but
of course.
I had, you're exactly right. All it was to me was music. There was really no genre there, or division of genre,
Yep.
And so that's really informed a very eclectic nature in my playing. Because when people go, "Oh, you're a rock player," I'm like, "Yeah, I guess I am definitely a rock bass player, but I do have country and folk influences and things like that, you know." And then so yeah, I mean, I really don't subscribe to just one style of music. I think I'd go crazy if all I heard was Van Halen. As great as early Van Halen was, I can't really listen to 5 records of that in a row.
No. No. And unfortunately, I think today's music is pretty compartmentalized, and they just try to sell you more of what you already liked.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a tragedy because like you mentioned, some of the younger people, if they don't go out and actively search outside that comfort zone that's getting fed to them, maybe by algorithms now on social media that just keeps putting sidebars of what video they might like based on what they used to watch, what they just watched. They may not discover some of the greatest unsung heroes. Joseph Spence, one of the greatest guitar players ever from the Bahamas, or some of the old blues players that we all kind of know, but they've sort of drifted into the background because of people just stopping at the blues at Stevie Ray and thinking that's where the blues started.
Exactly.
Not even going back to Johnny Winter, just a few years before him.
Yep.
Let alone keep going decade by decade all the way back to Robert Johnson, or going to Alan Lomax's Field Hollers and all the old field recordings he did for the Smithsonian recordings in the early 1910s and so forth.
Yep.
So there's an amazing breadth of music, and I'd like to think that probably some of the most interesting players that I listen to, you probably would find that they would speak as highly about a diverse range of musicians that influenced them as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
You hear like Peter Frampton again, right? You think, oh, Peter Frampton, great rock guitar. Oh my God, there's some sophistication in his phrasing. He swings really hard in his swinging, in his soloing, and his note choices, And people just go, "Oh, well, he's all over the radio. Do you feel like we do?" I'm telling you, "Do you feel like we do?" is epic. That's a Stairway to Heaven solo arrangement.
Oh yeah, it's a guitar
Bob
lesson.
Mayo on the keyboards. Right?
Yeah, it's a guitar lesson in itself.
Oh my God! Still to this day, I put it on and I'm like, it's so effortless. It's like watching a river going down a mountain to hearing the way Peter Frampton plays.
Yes, exactly. That's a great way of putting it.
Well, as an extension of that, I say that. The most revered players, they're not only so natural in that course, they're unexpected sometimes. When you hear a Van Halen solo for the first time, you don't know where that guy's going.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He wasn't predictable. No. Sure, he might have played pentatonic this or that, but my God, his phrasing, his swing feel, and how he just approached the instrument. Neil Giraldo was another favorite, or Elliot Easton.
Yep.
These guys are great accompanimists, but they're also great soloists they were really unexpected in what they did.
Yep.
And I love that about those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I should probably let you go. We've spoken for quite a while, taken a a lot of your time.
Well, I've probably taken way more than expected, but
No, it was great. It was fantastic.
Well, you asked great questions, and it's really wonderful to kind of go down the path again of some of these things that you reminded me of. But now we gotta stay in touch. I want to hear more about all the stuff that's on the fringes of my memory, so you can jog loose. Okay?
Yeah, anytime. I would love to speak with you.
Right on, James. You have a good one. Okay?
You too. Thanks for listening to Have Guitar Will Travel. You can catch up on all the things I'm doing at thedeadlies.com, and I'm on all the social media platforms as well. And please support Vintage Guitar and all the wonderful things they do, because they do many, many wonderful things for us guitar players. Thanks. Please subscribe. Please tell a friend, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye, guys.